Hi, welcome to the Arctic and welcome to AXA XL Arctic Live. We're here at the UK Arctic Research Station on the island of Svalbard. We're in fact in the most northerly community in the world, Ny-Ålesund, which is an international science settlement. We're here for the next 2 weeks doing a series of live broadcasts for schools and some very important scientific research. The science team have just left to look at the waters of the fjord just next to us, looking at two issues: ocean acidification and marine plastics. Today's first session of Arctic Live is a live investigation, and we'll be looking at some of the animals that live up here and how they're all connected through food webs. Before we get started, there's some very important shout outs to some of the schools who are joining us this morning. We have schools from the UK, India, Portugal and Bermuda with us. Very early get up from Bermuda, so welcome. So who do we have? We have Sapphire Class from Lamberhurst St Mary's Primary School. Good morning, Sapphire Class. Hi, great to have you with us. We have Edith Neville Primary, and they have been learning all about polar bears in the Arctic of Canada. What fun. I wish I'd learned about polar bears at school. You're very, very lucky. You'll have to keep a lookout outside just in case we get disturbed during this broadcast. So excited to learn more about the Arctic from a scientist. Well, that is great, and we've got so many great scientists up here with us at the moment. Big shout out to classes 5CM and 5W at John Ball Primary School. Hi there, welcome. And to Badger Class at Shute Primary School in Devon. Really great to have you with us. So what we're going to do today is we are just going to have a look outside and show you around the Arctic in just a little bit. Ellie, who's wonderful behind the camera and making sure this gets out to you. We'll get ready for that and go out into the cold. Not too cold today. It feels actually quite nice in the sun, but it felt very cold yesterday with the wind chill. We had a wind chill of -25 researching out on the fjord yesterday. And the fjord is the Norwegian for a sea inlet, and that's where we do our research. And then we'll come on to talking through some of the animals that we find up here and how they're connected, and we'll do a little food web investigation, and then of course a chance for you to ask any questions. My name's Jamie, so please do call me Jamie in your class or whatever it is. No doctors, professors, anything else. They're all out on the water, so really lovely to have you with us. And we'll have we ready for a peek outside, Ellie? Yep. Let's go outside and see what we can see and give you a bit of a show around in the Arctic. Here we are. Let's come out here, and a lovely day for it. The wind's died off, and that's super important for the science team, because when you got wind you get big waves and it's choppy and it's sort of bouncing up and down and very hard to get the samples done. So, just behind us I've got little crampony spikes on so I don't trip over. I've got to put sunglasses on actually to look down here. I think you can hopefully see the waters of the Kongsfjorden, and that's about 15 kilometers to these glaciers at the back. That's the Kongsvegen and the Kongsbreen glaciers. Then even further, I think it's about 20 miles away, are these wonderful peaks, like little pyramids called the Tre Krona, or the Three Crowns. And so this is where we're looking at the ocean chemistry and the plastics, just to see how that's changing. So that's what we're up here doing. I think it's one of the most beautiful views in the world. But we are in, I don't know if you can sort of creep out and show sort of a little bit of the view of the station itself. So when we're up here, we are based in what's called a research station. And that's essentially a building that supplies and houses us. So we've got bedrooms, we have bedrooms here, a bit further down there's a sitting room, and then lab space and all that kind of support for scientists. So we're not living in tents this time. We have a very nice base, and there's a bases from I think about 10 other countries: the Dutch, the Norwegians, the Japanese, the Germans, the Italians, all in the rest of the science village here at Neolescent. And we are actually based for Arctic Live. I'll just take these off so you can. Arctic Live, we're based in the garage and storeroom of the UK Arctic Research Station, and that's operated by the British Antarctic Survey. So as we come in, hopefully we don't trip over a boat or a boat suit or anything else that's you have to have for working in the Arctic. Let's close that. I don't want an icy blast of snow to come over the computers and everything else during this broadcast. So there we go. Just to give you a bit of a view what's happening outside. But now really looking at some of the animals, some of the creatures and life that lives up here. And for this live investigation, hopefully what you have... Actually, before we start that, can we get a shout out on, or some ideas on the live chat of any animals that might live in the Arctic? And Ellie will let me know how we get on. Any animals that might be living in the Arctic. And I'll get ready to show you the things that you'll need for this live investigation while you're thinking about that. So just in your classes at the moment, as many animals as you can think of that live in the Arctic. Oh, and there goes the plane. We have 4 flights a week, 2 on Mondays and 2 on Tuesdays. No, Thursdays. It's I think we've got a little package coming in, so it's very exciting. So it's a bit like waiting for the post to come, but you only get post twice a week. So any ideas of animals coming up on the live chat? Ellie, have you got some?
Polar bears.
Polar bears, more likely in the summer up here. They come to eat the bird eggs on the shore, but they're out on the ice at the moment, more to the north, but definitely polar bears. We have to be very careful. A lot of safety procedures around dealing with polar bears. The largest land carnivore. Clam. We do get clams up here. I haven't seen any, but I was with a French team who found scallops up here a few years ago.
Arctic cod.
Arctic cod. There are Arctic cod. Arctic cod, very cool. They have antifreeze in their blood, so they don't freeze in the cold waters here.
Narwhal.
I want to see a narwhal. I've never seen a narwhal. I really, really want to see a narwhal. Narwhal's a great one. What else? Who else have we got coming through?
Arctic fox, leopard seals, hooded seals.
Okay, leopard seals came through. I think they're only found in the Antarctic, and so have seen the wonderful leopard seal on an expedition down there.
About walrus.
Walrus, there's a walrus colony. It should be just out the fjord that way. So when we go, we're currently sampling the inner fjord. So on the boat, we're going out sort of in the enclosed piece, and then further this way, it goes out more towards the open sea, and there's some walrus normally out that way. So fingers crossed when we go out to sample. The weather's just a little bit rough at the moment, but it should be dying down over the weekend, so we'll be able to get further out to the open sea in our little boat.
Arctic foxes and Arctic hares.
Arctic fox. There was an Arctic fox that lived around the station, but hasn't been seen yet this year. And we'll come on to sort of how the changes in climate might affect the life up here a little bit later. And Arctic hares, I don't think I've ever seen an Arctic hare. Hares, yes, but not an Arctic hare. But yes, definitely an Arctic animal. So that's a really, really good selection of Arctic life you've come up with. And the beluga whale, I think we team saw one of beluga whale last year, and whoever said a copepod, that is massive high five to you, sort of like virtual high five like that. That is a fantastic animal. and we'll come on to why that's so important, and you'll make Dr. Kerry Lewis incredibly happy. She's currently out on the boat, but she'll be very happy to know that a copepod has been mentioned. It's her favourite marine animal. So what you'll need for this live investigation, hopefully you'll have a series of cards that we'll cut out in a bit, and these are all your different types of Arctic life. And you'll also have, and we don't have to do this all live, you can do this as some follow-up work as well, but we'll be talking through it. We'll be looking at how these different living things are related through food webs and food chains. Okay. So instead of you doing some research online, I'm going to be very, very nice, and I'm going to talk you through these different Arctic animals, and then we'll start talking about things like producers, consumers, predators, prey, and start linking them up in a food web. So I've got my bag of, see what I've done, I've cut those up. If you're going to make the food web mobile in this lesson, you'll also need a few other bits and pieces. You'll need some sticks to be the cross pieces for your mobile. If you are using a skewer, I find these like wooden skewers really good for this, but do sort of cut off the sharp ends, because that can be quite painful in your eye. We need some string, of course, to hang from, some scissors, some nice blunt nose scissors, and that is for cutting out the cards. Some tape. The only tape we ever have on an expedition is gaffer tape. You probably have normal tape, but this is the only tape we use. So to stick it all together. And for the artistically minded, of course, please do consider colouring in your animals, and photographs of all the animals included in this lesson are available on the Encounter EDU website, and I'm sure the team in London will post the URL for that gallery very, very shortly. We'll put those down. So what I'm going to do first of all is just to look a little bit at these different animals on here. You'll see that I've stuck it to a bit of cardboard with some glue, and that's just so it's a bit easier to have as a mobile, but we'll go through these different living things now. Ooh. So,
High five back for the copepod.
high five back from copepods. Do make sure you have a chat or send in any copepod questions to Dr. Kerry Lewis, and even if it's not during the live chat, which I think is on Tuesday next week, we'll make sure that she replies if you want any information about copepods. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to find the ones I want to start with first. Oh no, I'm going to do it in random order, so you don't know what order they're in, otherwise that would be cheating. So the popular one, we have, is that okay holding up?
Yep.
We have the polar bear. Polar bear, largest land carnivore. But is it really a land creature? Its Latin name is Ursus maritimus, which means sea bear, and it really relies a lot on the sea and the ice for its food. Cool facts about the polar bear: its hairs are hollow, so it traps more air to insulate, and it has black skin to absorb more of the sun's heat. So we're going to put our polar bear down here. Next up, what have we got? We have the Arctic cod. And we've talked about the Arctic cod before. Very fun, having antifreeze in its blood so it doesn't freeze and become a frozen fish finger in the Arctic Ocean. Next up, we have the beluga whale. And the beluga is a toothed whale. That means it isn't sieving through the ocean for lots of little creatures. It's actually hunting bigger fish and that kind of animal. We then have the walrus. The walrus, incredibly wonderful animal. And fun fact about the walrus is that the big male walrus who commands the beach and is basically sort of like the alpha male is called the beach master. So there we go. The beach master is the big male walrus you find there. I quite like that term. Cool. Super important. This is a picture of algae, and that is in terms of the ocean here, that's microscopic plant-like living things that make up, I'm not going to say, I was about to say, give away the answer there. Tiny wee plant-like organisms, living things. Here we have, next up is the copepod. Copepod, there are, okay, this is a challenge for all teachers watching. You have to write this number in figures on the board. This is the number of copepods there are in the world's oceans, and it is 1,347 billion copepods, the most abundant animal on the planet. And so that is 1347 and then 18 zeros. So we'll see. So it's almost like a sort of like a race for the teachers. We'll see who's done that first. But they're little crustacean. In terms of other crustaceans, you may know are shrimp and lobsters and that type of creature. They're little crustaceans, and they are about the size of your pinky fingernail. Different types of species, but around that size. Arctic fox is my favorite animal around Neolesund, where we are at the moment. Super cute, and one lived by the kitchen door and seemed to pose. Is this my best angle for photographs? But I think was just keen to have maybe a little scrapple to that may have been found their way out of the kitchen. We have this. What have we got next? We've got the sun. Can't have a food web or food chain without the sun. Not entirely true, but for today's purposes and for most of life on the planet is true. Although some very cool life powered by chemical reactions that lives deep in the ocean. That's a whole nother lesson with submarine life. So, but for Arctic life, the sun powering our food web. We then have the ringed seal. Okay, ringed seal, type of seal. Do remember that, like the whale, these are marine mammals. They're not fish. So it's easy to forget, but not so much with the seal, but with whales, that they are not fish, they are mammals. So the ringed seal. And last, but by no means least, we have the clam. Very important filter feeder, taking small animals, or no, not animals, but small algae from the water and having that and turning that into energy and life. So there we go. So what we're going to look at now is how we order these together. So have we got, so is this all okay here? Out of the sun. Okay.
Miss Reed's class wrote that number. She wrote it on the board in 5 seconds.
5 seconds. Miss Reed, awesome work. It took me about, I don't know how many times it took me before I could actually write that and remember how many zeros there should be. So that is fantastic. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at predator, prey, producer, consumer. We'll just go over some of those terms first. So producer is a living thing that takes energy from the sun and through a process called photosynthesis turns it into living matter. So we're going to try and find the living thing here that does that. I wonder if you got that. What living thing takes energy from the sun and through photosynthesis turns that into living matter? Is it the Arctic cod? Does the polar bear just lie in the sun and get bigger? Is it the beluga whale? I am going to go for algae. I'm going to move these things out. Algae is going to take sun to algae. Now, I'm going to try and think, bring it forward a bit, like down to here. Okay. Thank you very much. So we've got the sun going to the algae, and we're just going to make a very short food chain. We're going to think about something here that might eat algae, consume algae. So we've got a producer producing living matter from the sun, and then we've got a consumer that's consuming that and getting energy. So I don't think the polar bear is going to be eating algae. I might go for something smaller. And I'm going to go for the copepod. So I have energy going from the sun to the algae using photosynthesis, and then from the algae to the copepod in a feeding relationship. So the copepod here is the producer. Oh, sorry, the copepod is the consumer. Algae the producer, copepod the consumer. And if we were doing arrows, we would follow the energy. So the arrow would go from the sun to the algae, and another arrow from the algae to the copepod. And let's just think to see whether there's another food chain that we can do. I'm going to start this one. So I clear that one out of the way and start another one. And this is just have a play and think about the different relationships. I'm going to start off with the cod. Well, good. And then from the cod, I think what is going to be a cod predator? We're going to have the ringed seal. And then thinking about, well, what would be a ringed seal predator? Not going to be a clam. Probably too big for an Arctic fox. So I'm going to go for the polar bear. So there we have another short food chain. We start with the Arctic cod, and that is the prey for the ringed seal that is a predator. So the predator is the name of the animal that eats the smaller animal normally, and the animal that gets eaten is known as the prey. And then the predator at the end of this food chain is the polar bear, and the prey for the polar bear is the ringed seal. And the energy is going this way. Now all of these are consumers because they're all getting their energy from eating other things. So they're not getting their energy from the sun, they're getting all their energy from eating other things. Just going to check through, making sure we've got that, and give a bit of time for teachers in their classes to go over any of that. So we've got 4 important terms. We've got consumer and producer. Now a producer is a living thing that gets its energy from the sun. A consumer is a living thing that gets its energy through eating. And then we have predator and prey. So we have prey is the animal that gets eaten, and predator is the animal that eats. And when we have arrows in a food chain, they follow the energy. So there's an arrow from the Arctic cod to the ringed seal because the energy is going from the cod to the seal through eating. We have an arrow from the ringed seal to the polar bear because the energy is then going from the seal to the polar bear. Now these are called food chains because they're just single lines. But what we're going to look at now is whether we can put together a web, so having more different types of animals linked together. So Ellie, when you're ready, we're just going to look at having a chain. And so if you haven't had a chance to do it now, it really doesn't matter if you're making this now or whether you do that at the end of the lesson afterwards. I know there's quite a lot going on with these live investigations, so sometimes it's easier just to follow along and to complete it afterwards in class. I'm not going to attempt to cover any of these in my artistic ability, not great. But what I'm going to think now is about how we link these all in a food web. So the first thing I'm going to find is that first of all our food web is going to be the sun, and then I'm going to find the producer, which is producing energy from the sun. And what we're then going to do is to have a look at how all these other animals are connected. So let's just think through, before we do that, how they might be related in feeding relationships. So we have the okay. So just I think there's working in the Arctic. We are just looking at some of the science work that's taking place at the moment. This is what the scientists are actually doing. So they have headed out on an expedition really to go and sample in the fjord. And when we read these articles and when you ask these questions about how is the Arctic changing, it is the work of scientists like this who are out finding out what's going on. And it is incredibly important that we continue to do field work, just because if we just rely on things like satellites or video feeds, it's very difficult really to understand what's happening in an environment. So I think we have Carrie and Hannah out at the moment, and they'll be collecting a series of water samples and plankton samples and bringing those back to the lab to analyze. And a lot of the work that field scientists do feeds into our understanding of what's happening here. So into our understanding of food webs and that kind of thing. So we'll just be with you in a tick. I can tell you, working from the Arctic, never simple. And so we're busy behind the scenes just to bring you back the live feed while you have a look at some of the science work that we have been doing both this year and also last year. So it's a long-term monitoring project, and that means that we take samples year on year and look at how the Arctic is changing, both in terms of the chemistry of the ocean and also in the amount of plastics that we might find. So plastics, of course, have been much in the news across the world, and we'll be covering the issue of plastics through the week. So we have more broadcasts tomorrow, then not over the weekend, and then back on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday next week. And each day we have 3 different types of broadcasts. We have this live investigation, we have interviews with our science team, and also Arctic Q&As with Ellie and myself. So hopefully this has given you a bit of time to look at some of the feeding relationships. And so what you're focusing on is what are the predators and what are the prey. So without showing you, which is quite good actually, without showing you online what we're looking at each time, I would like you to find, first of all, we've got the sun, then we've got the producers, the algae, and then next up, what eats the algae. And so just spotting those two things. So we have the, oh, we're back on, so I'm just going to move what I've been talking about down here. And then we have the clam and the copepod eating the algae. We have the walrus eating the clams. Ooh, we have the cod eating the copepods, and then I think eating the cod we will have the seals and the beluga, and then probably eating the seals, baby seals. Oh, I'm going to have to move all this up. I mean, if that's okay. We will have the Arctic fox eating the baby seals, and the polar bears. So we'll get onto the questions very, very shortly, but just as energy from the sun to the algae, from the algae to the clam, into the walrus, from the algae into the copepod, into the cod, into the seals and the belugas, and then the seals for the polar bears and the Arctic fox. So really wonderful to be able to share that with you. I know we've only got 10 minutes left of this broadcast, so very, very excited to go through as many questions as we can that have been submitted in advance or that are coming up on the live chat. The first two questions I have are from Edith Neville Primary. How can pollution we make here in the UK make the ice melt in the Arctic, and how does the pollution get there? Well, I think the main thing to focus on, it's a really great question. The main thing to focus on is looking at carbon dioxide, so carbon emissions, and that makes the planet warmer through the greenhouse effect, like putting a blanket over the planet, and the Arctic is warming faster than anywhere else on the planet. And that melting, that heating is causing a variety of issues here in the Arctic. So it includes ice melt and also the creation of ice as it is raining earlier in the season, and then that rainwater is freezing. How does the pollution get here? It is really a global system, so the carbon dioxide that we're producing across the planet, so we're just, the radio you hear behind is that we have to be in constant radio contact with the field team for safety purposes. So there's always a bit of crackle of radio at the back, and that's just it collects in the atmosphere, and that is a general atmospheric change. Here we have, why are animals in the Arctic in danger? Again, from Edith Neville Primary. Well, I'll just give you, there are lots of examples. As the Arctic changes through warming, then the habitat changes, and this makes life more difficult for the animals that live here. I'm going to say that question, it's a bit of a distressing story. But it's what's happening here. Let's get an indication of talking about some of the distressing impacts on animals that we have literally just happened in the Ollesons over the past weeks. So if I can get a thumbs up or round robin from teachers watching, whether that's okay to continue, that would be perfect. So I'll come back to that because it's good to share what's happening. But I do understand if there's some younger children whom it may not be suitable for. So I'll come back to that, but let me know, Ellie, when we get sort of thumbs up from watching classes. Year 4, Victoria would like to know if there are animals that are herbivores. Yes, there are. So we have reindeer here. There's some reindeer just down on the shoreline last night. And there's some reindeer antlers behind me, so hopefully I don't look like some sort of Christmas character with reindeer antlers sticking out of my head. But there are some plants here, so they're underneath the snow, and the reindeer will use their hooves to scrape away the snow and feed on the moss and the lichen and the plants living underneath. Sippy Garn, Gamer, are algae affected by plastics found in sea, given that they photosynthesize for energy? That's a really great question. Not that I know of. Not that I know that the algae are adversely affected by the plastics in the sea, but I don't know whether their levels are affected by ecosystem changes as a whole. But not that I know. We're really mainly finding the impacts of plastics on the feeding habits of a range of different marine animals. And I'm pretty sure it doesn't affect algae, but we'll check back with that one. Will we get to see your lab, please? We will take photographs of the lab. It's not as exciting as it could be. Just to give you an idea of how field research is conducted in the Arctic, it is mainly sampling that happens up here. So we're out on the boat getting water samples, bringing those back and storing them. So taking them back to the laboratories in Exeter and Plymouth Marine Laboratory, who are the science partners for this. And then that is where the lab spaces are. So we showed you, it's a room with a bench and lots and lots of bottles, and then freezers and fridges to keep samples frozen or cold on their journey back down to the UK. Tabitha Reed would like to know, what do the indigenous people eat? There were no indigenous people here on Svalbard. So if we're talking about other peoples up here, so the Inuits and the Sami who've lived in the Arctic for a long, long time, they'll be eating the animals that we've just gone through. So seals, cod, that kind of thing. Kamal Preet, have you seen starving polar bears? For example, we haven't seen any polar bears. And I think that I will have to ask some of the experts up here about the impact of sea ice loss on polar bear feeding, and whether they're getting enough food from eating eggs and fledglings, so small birds in the summer. But they'll be out on the ice to the north and to the east trying to find seals at the moment. And then where are we? Do we have a thumbs up?
We've got an all clear from all the classes. They're in year 4 and they say it's okay for us, important to share it.
Okay, so earlier this spring up in the Ollesund, there was a beautiful, beautiful young reindeer, still pure white. And the community here was incredibly happy to have a sort of a new mascot almost for the settlement up here. We are quite remote and it can get quite lonely, so it was a really great thing. There was some rain that came through and some melt, and what that does is it creates an ice layer. So you saw outside there's like snow, but if it melts and freezes off this rain, you get a very solid layer of ice. And the problem with that is that ice means that the reindeer can't get their hoofs through it to access or to get to the lichen or plants or moss below. And so a number of weeks ago, the baby reindeer was found dead up on the slopes just above the village, starved, probably starved, or hadn't done a sort of autopsy or anything, but that's what they reckon here, which is incredibly sad that the rain early in the season is just making life impossible. Now, there's the second thing that's for me sort of doubly sad, is that we did have an Arctic fox as a little mascot, which I referred to earlier. And normally, if you've got a carcass out on the ice, you'll find that it's sort of gone, or hopefully sort of eaten over in a few days, because the Arctic foxes or maybe some carrion birds will have gone and fed on it, and that's part of the recycling of life in nature. That baby reindeer carcass has not been touched in the past weeks, which indicates that the Arctic foxes are also dead, and they will have died because probably because they can't access a food cache, so that they will have cached food, and then the ice layer means that they can't access those food caches either, and that came too soon, because normally they'll end up eating bird eggs over the summer, and they'll tie them over, so they couldn't access their winter food. So really, there's two sort of mascots, sort of type wild animals that have probably died in the past weeks, and those are it feels terrible, actually, that this early rain and this warming is just, you hear about the stories about an ecosystem changing, and then you sort of find it on the Arctic fox that sits outside your window and gives you a sort of a sort of bit of joy in the morning and everything else, especially when it's been really, really cold. So that's really hit home this year. Yeah, and that's almost the end of almost the end of the call. So one last couple of questions. Sorry. From Edith Neville Primary, how does the sun come up even if it's cold, and how cold is it in the Arctic? The sun comes up for 24 hours a day at the moment, and so it's the sun that provides warmth rather than the heat bringing the sun round. So we have 24 hours of sunlight at the moment. And how cold is it at the moment? At the moment, it is quite nice, between -5 and -10, which is very pleasant. But the wind chill will bring that down, and it sort of felt like -25. The coldest I've had in the Arctic is -48 ambient temperature, which is very cold, and then down to about -60, 65 with wind chill, which is probably boringly hurtful, painful cold. I think we've got time for just one more question, which is, why do polar bears, this is from Edith Neville Primary, why do polar bears eat seals, and why do seals like to sunbathe? Polar bears eat seals because there's lots of lovely energy, fat and meat there, and they are adapted to hunt for seals on the sea ice. And why do seals like to sunbathe? Who doesn't like to sunbathe? Really nice to lie in the sun and get warm. We'll probably sort of go and sort of have a quick blast of Arctic sun and warm ourselves up after this call. Thank you very, very, very much for being part of this Arctic Food Web live investigation. It's been wonderful having you with us. Do please share your experiences or photos, hashtag Arctic Live or @EncounterEDU. We're back in an hour or so with an expert interview with Clara Nielson, part of the science team here. After that, we have a Arctic Q&A with me and Ellie, and then for our classes in North America, we have another live investigation and expert interview with Clara this afternoon. Tomorrow we are broadcasting, and we have Nick Cox, who is our fantastic station manager, or as we used to call them, base commanders, who'll be talking to us tomorrow. I think we have a Keeping Warm investigation as well, so do join us for that. But it's been really, really lovely to have you with us, and it's a big Arctic goodbye to all you wonderful classes out there. Thank you so much, and I hope that you will reflect on climate change and the role and the ability we all have to do something about it, whether it's through our own changes in behavior, or whether it's asking government or companies or others, or even your head teacher to make a difference to where you are. This is a wonderful place, the Arctic, and it's so sad to see the changes that are happening. So until the next time, it's goodbye from the Arctic. Bye bye.